If You Don't Want My Opinion, Episode 17, Lost in Transit, by Carl Marking. 4 years later than I had originally imagined, I graduated from college, with honors, an accomplishment I had never imagined for myself. As I continued in therapy, I gave myself permission to worry less about what my family thought of me, or the fact that I was gay, and instead focused on things that fed my spirit. I continued to volunteer my time in service to others, which included advocating for LGBTQ civil rights. This manifested itself in many ways, including being visible as a gay man at my commencement ceremony, which my mother and sister attended. Because the college was so inherently conservative, and because the two faculty members I knew to be gay were also closeted and did nothing to advocate for others, I wore an earring of interlocked male gender symbols and slapped a rainbow flag sticker on top of my graduation cap. I knew, statistically speaking, that my fellow lesbian gay bisexual students existed, and although they may have chosen to be invisible, I didn't miss an opportunity to represent my community on campus. My mother and sister ignored my choices that day, which was fine by me. I was learning to work within the framework of their silence and denial. That night, after my sister had gone home and our mother to bed, I took one of my graduation announcements, addressed it to my late grandmother, went into the backyard, and set it on fire. As it burned, I thanked her for all she had done for me over the years, said how much her love had meant to me, and told her she'd always be with me. She may not have lived long enough to see me graduate, but I wouldn't have been able to have done it without her years of love and support. I decided to postpone grad school for a year and increased my hours at the bank to full-time. Still living in my mother's basement, my plan was to stay one more year, save as much of my paycheck as possible, and either relocate to Arizona or go far away to grad school. My community outreach experiences had renewed my interest in psychology, so I took undergrad courses at Wilmington College to explore whether or not I wanted to pursue a master's in organizational or social psychology. I dated a man after graduation who was quite a bit older than me. When he introduced me to his friends, something no other guy I dated had ever done, it became clear to me he was dating me because of my age. I didn't mind being his trophy boyfriend, given I was dating him for his body. It didn't hurt that he was also warm, funny, sexy, and a tremendous kisser. But when I learned he lived with his perfectly able-bodied mother, our relationship quickly soured. I felt it was one thing to live at home while getting your life launched, but quite another to live at home at 39, seemingly having failed to launch at all. Our breakup was without drama, and he invited me to his 40th birthday party that December. His friends had all chipped in and rented a DuPont family manor, turned event space, as his birthday present. I arrived alone, got a glass of white wine, and scanned the room to see if I knew anyone. The guy in front of me said something to the man by his side, and I couldn't help but laugh. He spun around, a smile on his face, and more accused than asked, "Are you eavesdropping on me?" "I didn't mean to," I said. "That was funny." "Humph," he said, maintaining both his smile and his eye contact. "Hi, I'm Carl," I said, offering him my hand. "And that's how I met Michael." We went on our first date 2 nights later, and I knew by the time we said our goodbyes in the parking area behind his apartment that he was the man I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I felt it in my bones. He lived an hour away, and I spent every moment I could with him. I was cast in the musical Hello, Dolly, being staged at a locally famous dinner theater where Bruce Willis once performed in his early 20s. The theater was located almost exactly halfway between Michael's apartment and my mother's house. This worked out well as I began splitting my time between the two. When the show opened, no one from my family came. I don't recall anyone from my family having seen me perform in anything I'd done since high school. My brother and his wife had moved close to my mother and were expecting their first child, a son. We were all thrilled and seemed able to put our differences aside as we looked forward to his birth. Michael and I had everyone up to his apartment for a 4th of July party, during which my sister came up with a name for the coming child, a name my brother and his wife ultimately used. My sister, mother, and sister-in-law adored Michael. Although my brother showed no feelings for Michael one way or another, it was a rare, good day among my family. By the end of the summer, I had officially moved in with Michael, left the bank, and taken a job closer to our apartment. My nephew was born, and my family continued to enjoy our unspoken armistice. We went from talking about nothing to focusing on our family's new addition, which served as deflection from talking about anything else. Michael thought it would be nice to have my family up to our place for an early Christmas dinner, as he and I were heading to Florida to spend the holiday with his family, which was his family's long-standing tradition. Although my sister didn't come, it was an otherwise good night. I even learned to change a diaper. We gathered as a family that January at my brother's house, and again, we all got along. The birth of my nephew gave us neutral territory to inhabit and explore. That spring, Michael and I bought a home, a pre-Victorian twin 2 blocks from our apartment. It hadn't been updated since the 1950s, and as such was in our price range. We fell in love with its potential and the quiet neighborhood. I was concerned about how much money and effort the renovations would require, but one of the few good things my father had instilled in me, having built the second story of our childhood home mostly by himself, was that if you knew how to read a book, you could do pretty much anything. When Michael wanted something, I did everything in my power to get it for him. I also wanted to buy the house because my sister had purchased her first home when she was 2 years younger than I was at the time. I still used her accomplishments as benchmarks for life goals and continued to follow in her footsteps when possible. Once my nephew was born, my brother's new family became the center of my family of origin. Michael's older brother had children, but their parents remained the center of his family of origin. Neither Michael nor I had close friends with children, so my family's shift away from our mother as our center point to our brother's family was somewhat unexpected. My family of origin now gathered primarily at the home of my brother's family. I didn't know much about the workings of extended families. Our father was an only child, so there were no cousins from his side of the family tree. Our mother had a sister, about 5 years older than her, who was married with 4 children. We only saw those cousins on trips to see our maternal grandparents. Our aunt's family never came to visit us. No one in our mother's family cared for our father. The age differences between me and our cousins, combined with the limited time we'd spent together growing up, kept us from ever forming a bond. Prior to Michael and I buying a house, we'd spent time at my sister's place, my brother's house, my mother's house, Michael's parents' house, Michael's sister's apartment, Michael's nearest brother's house, and assumed everyone would spend equal amounts of time at ours. But it didn't go that way. Michael's family would visit our home far more often than mine did. Regardless of whether or not we were having a party, variations of his family would come and stay with us. No one from my family ever did the same. Michael and I spent the first 6 months in our home tearing out the old threadbare wall-to-wall carpeting, taking down most of the original wallpaper, and painting much of the first floor. As our reward, we threw our first big party that fall. No one from my family came. Michael and I remained focused on work, our fur family, and renovating the house. Our parties often accented renovation milestones. We'd do a push to finish a room, then have a party. We'd finish a big landscaping project and have a party. Our parties became the stuff of neighborhood legend. Strangers who were neighbors, or almost neighbors, would occasionally stop by, introduce themselves, and ask if they could be invited to our next one. Although we repeatedly extended invitations, my family preferred to come only if it was just family. I didn't think much about it at the time, but now I wonder if it was because they feared they'd be surrounded by gay and lesbian people. In reality, we had very few gay or lesbian friends. My sister had purchased blueprints for her dream home, bought a plot of land in northern Maryland, and as she had it built, Michael and I continued our home renovations. Our parallel journeys did nothing to bring my sister and I closer. The only constant in our relationship at this point was the emotional distance between us, and our potential to change it. I continued to hope she'd get past the fact of my being gay, and move beyond strained tolerance to acceptance and even support. When her new house was finished, it was spectacular. It was 4 times the size of our mother's home, and more than twice the size of her previous house, Michael and my house, and my brother's family's house. The lot was partially wooded, and reminded me a bit of our grandparents' house, where my sister and I used to feed dry-roasted peanuts to chipmunks during our summer visits. I never understood why she wanted such a big place. It would have made me feel lonely living on my own in such a big house in a secluded area. But I felt she had become increasingly materialistic over the years, and the grandeur of her new home may simply have been a reflection of that. I also wonder if it was an extension of her infatuation with Mr. Labor's life. She could squeeze a dime out of a penny, but also had to have her Jaguar, was always shopping for precious gemstones, and had at least one fur coat she kept in cold storage. Her money, her choice, but her choices highlighted the widening gap in our ideologies and values. That same year, we had another professional family picture taken to include the new additions of my brother's wife, their son, and Michael. Even our mother decided to participate. My sister was still too thin, and although I worried about her, I had learned to keep the thoughts on the matter to myself. Other than me, my mother, and my nephew, no one else was making any physical contact. Another family picture that perfectly captured the fragmented nature of our relationships. For all the emotional distance between my sister and I, there were unanticipated moments between us over the years as we established our identities as adults. We'd have the occasional unexpected phone call, and she'd occasionally slip in some revelation. We once discussed her "Grandma loves you" bedspread, which always reminded me of times in her room as children. "That was complete propaganda," my sister said. "What? She never had a nice thing to say to me. Mom knew how I felt about her and bought that comforter to try and change my mind." That was news. During another call, she told me she'd decided to see a therapist. I was speechless. I never thought the day would come. "I stopped going after he hit on me," she said. I was livid. His violation of trust and breach of ethics was exactly the kind of behavior that could turn someone off therapy forever. I'd long thought my sister had issues with men due to our father and brother, neither of whom treated her or our mother well as we were growing up. We didn't have a healthy role model for what a loving relationship or marriage looked like. Our father cheated on and brutalized our mother and made empty promises to us all. It was, in part, why I believed she idolized Mr. Laborer. He was the closest real-world example either of us had of what it was to be a man and a father. I imagined how difficult it must have been for her to have finally found the courage and hopefulness to allow herself to be vulnerable with a therapist. Equally, I imagined how traumatizing his past must have been for her. "You should report him," I said. "Why?" "So he doesn't do it to someone else." She was silent. "And because he shouldn't have done it to you. Nothing would come of it. He could lose his license," I pushed. She didn't seem to have the heart or the fight to pursue it. It's hardly news that a woman's claims of wrongdoing by a man are routinely diminished or dismissed. That fact, combined with how we were endlessly gaslit by our father at every turn as children, allowed me to at least understand her reluctance. I don't think either one of us was accustomed to being believed and had learned we needed to be able to prove whatever we asserted. I imagined a he said, she said scenario was of little interest to her. This was another one of those times between us where my real-life experiences could have offered her comfort or perspective, but she'd made it clear through years of indifference that she preferred not to hear anything to do with my being gay, so I couldn't tell her why I understood how she might have felt in that moment. My final year of college, in order to flesh out my resume for grad school applications, I volunteered at a local male STD clinic run by Planned Parenthood. The clinician in charge of the male clinic began sexually harassing me. It began with a stray touch of my shoulder, advanced to him placing his hand on my bicep, and when he whispered, "Are you ready to have some fun?" in my ear just before the clinic opened, his lips so close I could feel his warm, moist breath against my skin, I had a decision to make: quit or report him. I chose to tell the head of the clinic, who was disinclined to believe me. "I don't even think he's gay," she said, as if that had anything to do with anything. When he'd done those things to me, he was smart enough not to have witnesses. Classic predator, classic his word against mine. Because his whisper in my ear reminded me so much of the night I was raped, and because I was tired of being silent in the face of someone else's inappropriateness, I pushed the matter and provided dates, what had happened on each date, and who was in the building at the time. She reluctantly reprimanded him. In response, I faced a surprising and silent backlash from the office tribe, of which he'd been a part for years. I was the interloper. I was the bad guy. I was the problem. I said, "Fuck this," and quit. I had better things to do with my time. I could have shared all of that with my sister. I could have told her that I chose to report the asshole to the head of the clinic. I could have told her I understood the potential he said, she said concerns. I could have told her that in the end, sometimes it's more about standing up for oneself than anything else. But because of her established lack of interest in that part of my life, I didn't say anything. I understood her reluctance to stand up for herself. I just wished, for her, that she'd had the strength and the support system to have done so. I was pinched between trying to respect her position about not hearing about my life and knowing it wasn't my place to push her to do something she didn't want to do. I really wanted to know her therapist's name. I would have loved to have paid him a visit and done for her what she'd done for me on the ice that winter in elementary school. But all I could offer was empathy. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. The damage that man must have done to her trust and faith in others was disgraceful. Although we experienced a similar event that could have helped us bond, we ended up with silence and distance. My sister eventually started dating again after Manny had broken her heart. The man seemed nice enough, was close to her age, divorced, and had shared custody of his 2 children. Beyond that, she was her usual tight-lipped self on the matter. That fall, Mr. Labor was diagnosed with lung cancer. I learned it ran through the men in his family, regardless of lifestyle choices, and there was no realistic hope for a recovery. My sister was devastated. When I saw her at his funeral, she was still shockingly thin. I still said nothing. "Where's Mom?" I asked. "She isn't coming." I was stunned. "She didn't even visit him in the hospital," she concluded flatly. Mr. Labor had been a fixture in our lives. He and our mother had a deep, decades-long bond. He and his wife graciously endured our father's passion for taking cloud pictures when flying his single-prop airplane. They'd sit through carousels of his slides, projected on the home movie screen he'd set up in our living room, feigning enthusiasm while they nursed their drinks. They'd come to countless dinners at our parents' home before the divorce, and we'd been to countless events at theirs. He and his oldest son were at our house the day our father broke through the dining room wall to form the doorway to the staircase up to the second-floor addition. The job he gave my sister in high school helped her pay for her trip to Germany. He opened his home to my mother and me without hesitation after the apartment fire following our parents' divorce. He and his wife once took our mother with them to Barbados for a vacation. When our mother walked in on a would-be attacker as she went to go to bed one night, Mr. Labor defended her with a cushion until the man ran off. He had specifically helped my sister in countless ways throughout her life, from being the father figure and role model our own father wasn't, to having helped her get a seat on the board of a bank earlier that year. For years I'd fantasized that perhaps he was my biological father. I was tall like him, taller than anyone in my immediate family. I had curly hair like him, also unlike anyone in my immediate family. And like my sister, I had yearned for a father other than my actual father. As I stood by her side after the burial, she began to cry. "From the time I was born, there was the sun, the moon, and the labors," she said through her tears and a heartsick smile. Not long after the funeral, I learned my job was being eliminated. The last meeting I attended at work was with a software company pitching a product they clearly didn't know how to position. The next day, I mailed my resume and a letter saying as much to the software company's director of sales, outlining how they should position it, along with its value proposition. I was hired after my first day of interviews. It was the best job I'd ever had. I used every single skill I possessed and everything I'd ever learned. Going to work was a joy. That spring, true to her word, my sister married the man she'd been dating, who was, in fact, the next man who came along and showed any genuine interest in her. Their ceremony was in a small church. Michael and I had the responsibility of looking after my nephew to keep him entertained while we waited for the ceremony to begin. As we roamed the grounds, we discovered the bell rope. Michael, incapable of self-restraint, gave it a hard pull. As the church bell rang, he immediately called out the name of my 4-year-old nephew in mock accusation. It was Michael's thing, to do something impulsive and, if it had a dire consequence, blame the nearest person. My sister's husband was a good guy, but there didn't seem to be much chemistry between them. It all felt so civil. Michael and I had the reverse problem. We had the outward appearance of plenty of chemistry, but our relationship had hit many walls. We had been engaged for almost 5 years. His continued refusal to commit to a wedding date fueled a deep loneliness I carried. I knew by this point that Michael and I weren't really meant for each other, but I either didn't have the heart or the ability to end things. I had invested so much into him, our home, and our relationship that I was determined to get him down the aisle no matter what. As much as I believed we weren't meant to be together, I also told myself our wedding would somehow be the missing piece our relationship needed to survive. As adults, my sister and I shared one core thing. We loved to entertain. Her house was literally designed for it, with its open floor plan, massive kitchen, formal and casual living and dining rooms, a small bar off the kitchen, and even a basement media room. Michael and I had a much smaller space, but it didn't stop us from packing it with friends and neighbors. Although we continued to invite my family to our parties, they rarely attended. On the other hand, we would go to theirs, or I should say, I would. Their parties were usually on Saturday afternoons, which was frustrating for Michael, who worked most Saturdays. As a result, I typically went alone. Michael and I had an argument about it once. "You never make time for my family," I said heatedly when he declined yet another of my family's Saturday party invites. "We never get invited with enough notice for me to ask for the time off," he shot back. I hadn't looked at it that way until that moment. Given my brother and sister-in-law also worked in retail, it suddenly seemed an odd disconnect. During another one of their Saturday parties that Michael couldn't attend, my mother accidentally provided the missing piece. "Your brother and sister are so much closer since your nephew was born," she said to me. "You think?" My sister loved our nephew, but I knew full well she tolerated our brother, and nothing more. "They must. They coordinate their schedules to make sure they can attend one another's parties." What I had been dismissing as an innocent disconnect suddenly had intention, as Michael and I were not given the same consideration. After my mother's disclosure, unless it was in celebration of some milestone, I stopped going to their parties. Time spent with my family became even more sporadic. After our mother's revelation, I became further disheartened by their choice not to work to include Michael and me in their lives. I decided my time was better spent renovating our house than showing up for people who inconsistently showed up for me, or for us. I was tired of their homophobia, disguised as oversight. It became another wedge between me and my family. "Hey, what's up?" I answered my cell, seeing my sister's number. "Just thought I'd say hello. What are you up to?" She rarely, if ever, called to chat at this point in our relationship. "Oh, I'm on my way to the doctor. I have something in my eye and I can't get it out." "Maybe it's syphilis," she said sharply. "Excuse me?" I don't know why I said that. I didn't respond to her non-apology. Like everyone else in my family, she believed that to apologize was to appear weak. "Why do men cheat?" she continued. "I'm gonna need a little more here." She went on to explain she'd discovered her husband was chatting online with a woman. And that was why she said the thing about syphilis. She feared her husband was cheating on her, and she lashed out at me, instead of directing her emotions at her husband where they belonged. He seemed to be a decent man and not at all duplicitous. Infidelity didn't seem to be something that would be in his character, but she knew him better than me, and was clearly upset by what she'd found. "I wouldn't call that cheating," I said. "What would you call it then?" she demanded. Reconnecting with an old friend? Nostalgia? She wasn't having either of these options. Imagining there may have been more to what she had discovered than what she had shared, I offered, "Talking with someone isn't cheating. Flirting isn't cheating," I said. Silence. "Look, everyone wants to reconnect with people who knew them when they were young. It sounds more like nostalgia than cheating," I concluded. It was an unusual exchange between us at this point in our relationship. She almost never shared details of her private life, any more than she asked questions about mine. It was the core inequality in our relationship. She could share details of her life with me, but I was not encouraged to do the same. We downshifted into small talk, and she quickly ended the call. Our relationship continued to be full of false starts to repair the distance between us. I also didn't care much for the person she was becoming. The year Michael and I invited her to Thanksgiving, and she arrived 3 hours late. She didn't let us know she was going to be late. She didn't explain why she was late, and didn't apologize. Things don't get much more thoughtless or disrespectful than that. One Christmas, Michael and I invited my family to our place for Thanksgiving in the coming year. We spent the next 11 months working our tails off, finishing our first floor renovations, only to have everyone cancel 2 weeks beforehand. Through my mother. No explanation was ever given, just my mother telling me one day that no one would be coming. One year, my sister gave me a chef's jacket with the pride rainbow as piping around the collar and my name embroidered on the breast. It was the first supportive gift she'd given me since I'd come out to her. I went to try it on, but it didn't fit. "I got you the smaller size as an incentive," she said. That jacket hung in various closets for 20 years across 4 different houses, having never been worn a single time. I finally donated it to charity before moving into house number 5. She once gave Michael and me adjacent pages from a map she'd found at a flea market with her husband. The maps represented the countries of Michael and my family heritage. It was the most thoughtful gift she'd given us as a couple, and we were genuinely touched. I suppose in her way, it was the closest thing to an endorsement of our relationship that she could manage. But given we would have to cover the cost to have the pages framed, it was also the first time I'd been given something and thought, this isn't a gift, it's an obligation. But I wanted to encourage her attempt at inclusivity, so we thanked them, spent hundreds of dollars to have it framed, and hung it. About 6 years into our engagement, as I had opened my mouth to tell Michael I felt our relationship had run its course, he said, "Let's set a date." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Even though I was unsatisfied in most everything about our relationship by this point in time, I still had managed to convince myself our wedding would save it. And so we set a date. Although gays and lesbians still didn't have their full civil rights, so the ceremony would only be symbolic, it was still hugely important to me, and we began planning the wedding I'd lost all hope would ever happen. We got married in a small historic church just outside town. Our groomspeople were friends from our lives before we met, friends we'd made together, and Michael's older sister, Abigail, who had always supported us and with whom we spent the most time between both our families. I didn't include my sister in our wedding party because of the distance she kept from Michael and me over the years. My brother was out because, in the same call that he accepted the wedding invitation, he told me he wouldn't bring my nephew, as he didn't want to expose him to that lifestyle. My brother's comment about exposing his son to our lifestyle when he accepted our wedding invite did 2 things. First, it aligned with our mother's remark that he and our sister weren't making any effort to include us in their parties. Heaven forbid the gay brother and his lover were around. Second, it was the beginning of the end of my relationship with my brother. The following spring, I had a week-long trip to London. Michael took off from work, and we made it something of a honeymoon. My work trip was a big success, but our honeymoon, not so much. We were imploding as a couple. That summer, the man who had recently taken over the company where I worked called me into his office. "I don't like homosexuals. You're fired." And that was that. I had no legal recourse because gays and lesbians had no federal legal protections at the time. I was devastated. I'd never been fired, and my vision for the company's flagship software had just gotten them international attention and accolades. Michael and I lived close to the bone. I was the breadwinner, and the bottom was falling out of my industry. Quickly finding another job was going to be incredibly difficult. Years earlier, I had approached Michael about how unsatisfied I was with the sexless nature of our relationship. It had been that way from the beginning. I suggested couples counseling early on, but the first time the therapist suggested Michael needed to work on something, he was done. "Clearly that man is a quack," he said in the car before we'd even left the parking lot for home. Years later, I approached him again about our lack of physical intimacy. "I'm just not a sexual person," he said. "You do what you need to do." And he walked out of the room. So rather than leave him, I took him at his word and got my sexual needs met elsewhere. Weeks after I'd been fired, Michael had left a chat window open on our shared home computer, and I discovered he and I had hooked up with the same guy. Finding this out didn't upset me from a physical fidelity point of view. What upset me was the realization that it wasn't that he didn't want to have sex. He specifically didn't want to have sex with me. I didn't even tell him I'd seen his chat. I felt it no longer mattered. I could tell the end of our relationship was near. A month or so later, we went to stay with Abigail for the weekend. She lived in New York City, and we always had a great time together. Of all his family, she and I had the strongest connection. Months earlier, Michael and I had seen battery-operated lighted ice cubes in a restaurant in Philadelphia. I managed to find the vendor, ordered some, and while the 3 of us were eating dinner at a restaurant, I discreetly turned them on and slipped them into our drinks. "What are those?" a young woman asked from the table next to us. "Lighted ice cubes," "Here," I said, walking over to her table. "Have some." She and her friends pealed with laughter. "The nerve," Michael said in mock exasperation. "Who does she think she is?" "Julia Stiles," I said. The next morning, before we left for home, I said to Abigail, "I hope we'd remain friends if Michael and I ever split up." I couldn't shake the feeling it was the last time Michael and I would see her as a couple. "Where's that coming from?" she asked. "Well, I don't know. Just generally speaking, I guess. I really like you, and if anything ever happened, I just hope we could remain friends is all." Once we got back home, she called Michael and told him what I'd said. Then his siblings found out, and by the time our one-year wedding anniversary arrived, he had told his entire family I had been cheating on him for years. It had been foolish of me to say anything. His family was a tight-knit tribe, and Michael loved to control the narrative of our lives to friends and family. He also loved to play the wounded party. As such, he ensured I was the bad guy to his innocent, blameless victim. Even though I had known for years that our relationship wasn't healthy, even though I would lie awake at night feeling loneliness emanating from my body in waves, I was incapable of being anywhere else in the world other than by his side as he slept. He was family to me, and I loved him with all my being. His actions left us no way to repair our relationship. His family would never forgive me for cheating on him, and so our relationship was over. Regardless of what either of us may have truly wanted, his disclosure made repairing our relationship impossible. Because of Michael's need to control the narrative, I knew it was only a matter of time until he told my family. I called my mother to break the news that Michael and I were splitting up and selling the house. "I don't have any money," she blurted out without a second's hesitation. Given my news and the fact I did not have a history of asking my mother for money, it was a shit response. That was all I got from her. No empathy, no words of wisdom, no questions. I didn't call my siblings. I was still not speaking to my brother over Michael and my wedding. I figured our mother, who traded in gossip, would spread the word, which she did. A couple of days later, Michael told me my sister had called him while he was at work to ask what had happened and to see how he was doing. I am sure he told her the same narrative he told everyone else, that it was all about my cheating on him. My sister didn't contact me about our breakup. She chose to hear Michael's side of things, and only Michael's side of things. It was an absolute betrayal to me. Splitting up with Michael was the most pivotal moment in my life after my coming out, and she managed to have an even shittier response. No response at all. The following February, on Valentine's Day, Michael and I signed the agreement of sale on our home and moved out by the end of March. I didn't hear from my sister until 4 months after Michael and my breakup. She called me, not to express sympathy or empathy, not to apologize for having disappeared on me, but because she'd heard I'd gotten my real estate license and wanted to know if I could give her the names of realtors in New England, as she and her husband were going on a scouting trip to potentially buy a property. I gave her some names. After Michael and I went our separate ways, I ended up with Jack. Jack, Michael, and I had been in a casual throuple toward the end of our relationship. Jack had long told me he loved me. We had similar senses of humor, a desire to make something of our lives, and when we had sex, we connected, mind, heart, and body. It felt like making love. I'd only felt that once with Michael in the 8 years we'd been together. I felt with Jack all the things I had wanted to feel with Michael, but couldn't, because he had never been interested in the sexual side of our relationship. These were not my finest hours. I did the best I could with the skills and emotional tools I had at the time, within the context of Michael and my dysfunction. I was emotionally lost, unemployed, and Jack felt safe and familiar. There is comfort in the familiar, even when it isn't always in our best interest. A nuance of life that I had yet to learn. Jack and I bought a small, run-down 19th century row home several blocks away from Michael and my old house. My being out of work gave me the time necessary to gut the place, and my share from the sale of Michael and my place gave me the money to renovate it. While Jack was at work each day, I worked on the house. I had hours alone with my thoughts every day, and I spent those hours thinking about what had gone wrong, and I realized I shouldn't have rushed into another relationship. Things with Jack were complicated. by the tremendous guilt I carried relevant to Jack's involvement in Michael and my relationship, by Michael having painted Jack as the unwelcome interloper, me as the cheating partner, and himself as the blindsided innocent, by the fact that Jack wasn't out to anyone but his sister, and by the fact that the friends I had left after Michael and I split either didn't like Jack or blamed him on some level for blowing up Michael and my relationship. The reality is that Michael and I blew up our relationship all on our own. It started the first year we dated and took us 7 more to complete the demolition. We both acted and failed to act in ways that led to the demise of our relationship. Neither of us were innocent victims. Michael, Jack, and I slowly formed a new platonic friendship. We'd have each other over to one another's houses, we'd dog sit for each other as needed, but as time moved on, Jack and my relationship grew toxic. Roughly 90% of all relationships begun through some form of infidelity fail. Jack and I were no exception. By the 1-year mark, we had transitioned to roommates. Passive-aggressive, dysfunctional roommates. Once the economy and tech industry rebounded, I got a job with another Big 4 professional services firm. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined I'd make at that point in my life. Michael occasionally drove by Jack and my house on his way home from work, and stopped by one night to see the kitchen we'd just finished renovating. Jack was out with his sister. As Michael and I were hanging out, talking about nothing, he began to cry. "This is supposed to be our life," he said. I had not seen that coming. "You're the one who threw our life away," I said gently. "You're the one who told your family, and my sister, that I'd been cheating on you, rather than trying to work things out. You're the one who couldn't get away from me fast enough after I lost my job." "I think I acted recklessly," he said. "I think I made a mistake." It became clear Michael and I had unfinished business between us. After many months of conversation about what had gone wrong with our relationship, and what we needed from one another that we hadn't gotten the first time, we decided to give our relationship another chance. I hadn't had any substantive contact with my sister in almost 2 years when she called looking for a realtor referral. When Michael and I began looking at houses, I decided to send her an email saying he and I had decided to get back together and that I wanted to clear the air between us. I knew how much she adored him. In my note, I shared how betrayed I felt when he and I had split up and she called him, but not me. I wrote how hurtful it was that when I finally heard from her months later, it was so she could get her needs met, a realtor referral, but she still asked nothing about my life. I wrote how hurt I was by her lack of contact over the last 2 years. I wrote how negating her years of last-minute party invitations had felt to Michael and me, and how hurt we were the Thanksgiving she showed up 3 hours late with no phone call or explanation. I shared how upsetting it had been for Michael and me the year the family blew us off entirely for yet another Thanksgiving, how we'd spent a year renovating the place in preparation for the first family holiday we would have hosted as a couple. I finished by saying I wanted to discuss these things with her, as well as our relationship in general, to resolve the conflicts between us, so we could somehow move forward. Her response came quickly. "Fuck you." She went on to write I was being a victim and playing games with her. I had no idea what she was talking about. She had literally victimized me. I had just given her concrete, real-world examples of how, and to her mind, I was playing games? I didn't know how to respond, and realized, as sad as it was, the time had come to let her go. That May, Michael and I moved into our second home together. The front bedroom was about 40 yards from the main road. After we'd gone to bed our first night, Michael got up, grabbed his pillow, and said, "It's too noisy. I'm going to go sleep in the back bedroom." He didn't come back to our bedroom. Ever. With almost no discussion, he moved his things into the back room of the house. "This was a mistake," he eventually said, referring to both the house, which he had to have, and getting back together, which he'd initiated. I was destroyed. I'd spent 10 years of my life beating my head against Michael's walls, hoping that if I could only love him enough, he'd love me back. By July, I was angry with Michael and angry at myself. I felt so stupid to get back with a man who had repeatedly demonstrated over the course of a decade that he couldn't or didn't love me. I couldn't understand why I kept doing this to myself. I realized I needed to go back into therapy and figure it out. I needed to figure it all out. My abuse, my rape, my family dynamics, both as children and adults, and why I repeatedly beat myself bloody against Michael's walls. I met with multiple therapists. The first two I'd found through my insurance plan. They knew nothing about gay culture or the gay experience, and I spent the majority of my sessions educating them, which wasn't what I was paying for, and a waste of my time. The third therapist was a referral who didn't take insurance, but she had the credentials and experience I thought I needed. Faith was exactly what I needed. Even though, more often than not, our sessions left me rattled and angry, her goal was to connect my whole self, mind, body, and heart. During one of our first sessions, she asked me a question that forced me to look at a choice I'd repeatedly made over the years. When I answered, she said, "That's an excellent textbook response. Now I want to know how you feel, not what you think I think you should be feeling." I wanted to simultaneously bolt from her office, open up, and burst into tears. I knew in that moment I'd found the right therapist. If she hadn't established trust with me so quickly, if I hadn't felt safe in her presence, I imagine I never would have seen her again after that exchange. Though I didn't realize it going in, I needed a therapist who could see beyond my intellect, through my canned responses, and hold me to account. Faith was firm, fair, and fearless, which was exactly what I needed. I slowly began to understand there was no hope that Michael and I could ever be together. Although I'd known this intellectually for years, I finally felt it in my heart and was devastated by the truth of it. I had a complete breakdown and had to take a week off work to get my shit back together. Michael wanted me to buy him out of our house, out of his mistake, so he could move on. I had neither the money nor desire to do that. The entirety of our relationship, I bailed him out of one mess after another, just as his family had done before me, and I wasn't going to do it again as he ended our relationship for the second time. It was a terrible period between us, which lasted over a year. I spent every weekend and vacation making home renovations so we'd make some money on the sale of the place. Although he was chomping at the bit to sell, rather than helping me do the work to get the place market ready, he took 3 vacations with his family during that same period. On the upside, being stuck in the house together forced us to deal with each other and our relationship baggage. In the end, we forged a friendship, which was all we should have ever been, friends, and nothing more. That July, renovations completed, we listed the house, and as was our custom, threw a party. Entertaining others was something we consistently did well together. 10 days before Thanksgiving, I got an email from my mother. "Your sister called last night for a chat. She said she would really like to invite you and Michael to come for Thanksgiving, but isn't sure how you would react or if you would return her call. She knows you and Michael are not together, but she is still fond of him." It was a ridiculous idea, and an attempt to sidestep the repairs she and I needed to make to our relationship. She knew I had no stomach for a family event with our brother, and I hadn't heard from her since her "fuck you" email almost a full 2 years earlier, which created an almost 4-year gap of any meaningful contact between us. The idea was out of touch with our reality, and landed on me as if she were far more interested in seeing Michael than repairing our relationship. She had my contact information, but was hiding behind our mother, just like she'd done when she bailed on Michael and my attempted family Thanksgiving. It was also another last-minute invitation to Michael and me, and a decade's worth of last-minute invitations. She'd learned nothing. As it happened, Michael and I had already invited our neighbors over for Thanksgiving. I emailed my mother as such, and left it at that. The following month, Michael and I decided to throw our final joint Christmas party. It was bittersweet, given hosting a Christmas party was our longest-running tradition when we'd been a couple, but it felt fitting to have just one more. I decided to invite my sister and her husband, mostly because I didn't expect they'd come. I was surprised to get her email asking what they could bring. The irony. Having rarely come to anything Michael and I had invited them to over the years, she was all in for the end of our relationship. I remember that party, the clusters of friends and coworkers chatting throughout the house, what I served. I remember people saying their goodbyes. I don't remember my sister or her husband being there. Maybe they were, and I was so overwhelmed with everything else that the memory just didn't stick. In the end, what did it matter? Whether she came or not, given her sideways invite to Thanksgiving, she'd have come to see Michael